Fighting the Russian war machine. That's what I want to talk about in today's video. I feel like there's a lot of misconceptions regarding Russia's military as a fighting force and how competent they are. There's very few people, at least Westerners, who've actually fought against the Russians and the Russian military. I've gotten a lot of questions about what it was like out there and fighting against the Russians. I figured I could share my perspective and some of the things that I saw. So right out of the gate, I feel like there's this huge misconception that the Russians are some caveman army, some incompetent group of rabble and rebels that use sticks and stones to fight their enemies. And that couldn't be further from the truth. The Russians have an extremely competent military. They're up there, I'm willing to say, within the top 5 of most technologically advanced militaries. Before I went to Ukraine, I had done my research about Russia in the past. I knew that they were a very significant threat. Now, it's important to note that I know that there's probably multiple units in the Russian military that are extremely uneducated about warfare. They're under-equipped. They have no idea what's going on. Maybe they don't even have rifles. I've heard crazy stories. So I'm sure those units are out there. But as a whole, in general, Russia is a very competent fighting force. In my personal opinion, Ukraine is outclassed in every category of warfare against Russia, with the exception of willpower. Ukraine is fighting for their home, for their own freedom, for their family and friends. The same way if you think about if somebody came into America, how hard you would fight to protect your land, your family, your people, right? Their sheer willpower is what has kept them in the fight this long, in my opinion. Of course, all the support and donations and weapons and everything that's been given by other countries to Ukraine, obviously that is extremely helpful for Ukraine. But at the same point, if all these things were given to a nation that had zero will to fight, it wouldn't matter how much stuff they got. But Ukraine, even if all they had was sticks and stones, they just had farmers with 12-gauge shotguns and, pickaxes, they would still fight these Russians. I think this aspect of the entire conflict, the Ukrainian willpower, was extremely misjudged by Putin and his cabinet of, war officials. Putin had promised his country and the world that he would make it to the center, the capital of Ukraine, Kyiv, in 5 days. This war has been going on for over 2 years, and it's just push and shove. They're literally fighting for feet, for meters of land. I want to make like a little list or a little diagram of things that Russia has that are better, that outclass Ukraine. So here's a real simple list of what I'm talking about. Russia has better technology, more weapons, more vehicles, better vehicles, larger command structure, more fighters, and more money. And on the other side, Ukraine definitely has the superior will to fight, plus, of course, the supplies and support from the Western allies. So as you can see, the odds are extremely stacked against Ukraine. And it really goes to prove how much of a difference a strong will to fight makes during a conflict. Now, aside from all that, something worth mentioning is the fact that almost every single Russian leader prior to Putin, so I'm talking about, I have a list pulled up here. We have Lenin, we have Stalin, we have Gorbachev, up to Putin. All these people in the past have had major military occupations, campaigns, or invasions into different countries. Putin didn't have anything that major until this invasion of Ukraine. So I think what we're seeing is largely Putin's ego that's keeping this conflict going. Regardless of the amount of losses that the Russians take, the amount of casualties and weaponry and vehicles, he is willing, I believe, he will go until he dies, which might be soon. He doesn't look like he's doing too well. Putin is not an idiot. He's not stupid. He's not low IQ. But his greed and ego, I believe, suppress his common sense, his compassion, and his empathy for the people in Ukraine and them wanting their own freedom from Russia. Russia has been in a conflict, at least one conflict, for as long as I can remember learning in history. I mean, prior to World War II, prior to World War I, all the way back, Russia's been fighting with somebody. Now, they have a huge landmass, right? Especially when they were back in the USSR. The Soviet Union was even bigger than Russia is now. They are, in every sense of the word, battle-hardened veterans as far as a country goes. They're no strangers to conflict or warfare, but what they are strangers to is losing conflict and warfare, which I wouldn't say they're necessarily losing to Ukraine, but they are not wiping them off the map like everybody had thought. I would personally love to see the UN or NATO take the leash off of Poland or take the leash off of France, let them put boots on the ground and stomp Russia the rest of the way out. But there's always this fear of a larger global conflict ensuing if anybody else gets in the conflict. So of course you have America saying, hey, hold on, don't do that, don't do that. Send them weapons, whatever, but don't put boots on the ground. I wanted to share a couple of experiences I had while I was out there on the front line that really gave me a perspective on how outmanned, outgunned, and outclassed Ukraine is to Russia. On my first mission, I remember I was in my foxhole. I have a video of my first foxhole right here, I believe. I was in my foxhole and there were tank rounds ripping above us. And there was an armor battle, a tank battle above us. Not above us, but if the trench lines are here, there was a tank battle here, Russian tank, Ukrainian tank, and it was shooting over us while we're here in the trench line like this. So you could hear the huge tank rounds ripping through the foliage and the trees right above your head. I mean, it was crazy. And I started realizing the kind of tanks that Ukraine was using, and like the T-90s, I believe, or T-80s that Russia was using. I was thinking, wow, Russia definitely has the upper hand in this tank fight. Later on that same mission, we heard a helicopter. And you know when you're out there, it's not going to be friendly. Any big vehicles or anything like that you hear, you know it's the enemy, because Ukraine doesn't have as many. They're spread way more thin across the front line than Russia. Russia has more of them. They can spread them more evenly across the front. So there, I believe it was a Cobra is what the Ukrainian commander I was with said. And they have thermal vision, obviously. These are super high-tech fighting choppers. So something that we were told to do was remove any patches that we had that had IR, like stickers or threading. Sometimes you have that on your patches, so, you know, other people, maybe your own units can see you. We were told to remove these because obviously the chopper with this infrared capability or thermal capability could see these patches on us. And we were also advised to use our emergency blankets, or like thermal blankets, those almost like foil looking blankets, using those to cover ourselves when these helicopters would come over to block our heat signature from their thermal sensors. Luckily, this only happened to me a couple of times, but when that helicopter came over and I was hiding under a blanket to block my thermal signature, I realized this is crazy. I'm sitting in a hole. I've got a couple grenades and an AK-74 from the Soviet era. And the enemy's got T-90 tanks and these Cobra helicopters flying above us. I felt like a monkey with a stick in a hole. There was nothing I could do to either of these targets, any of these vehicles, with what I had with me. And same one for most of the people that I was with. Some of us had some anti-vehicle weapons, single-use rockets that we could use, but I mean, shit, dude, you gotta be close as hell for that. You gotta be accurate, and you gotta have balls of steel. And even if you hit it, they could still light you up if you hit it, you know? It really gave me a perspective of how outclassed the Ukrainians are. While I was out there, I made this comparison in my head that I felt like probably what the Taliban may have felt like hiding in their dirt huts in their caves while the US came and just annihilated them with all this high-tech stuff. I felt like that may have been somewhat of a comparison, because I've got this old AK and I'm hiding in a dirt hole with this blanket covering me. Like, once I had this realization, I started noticing things like this more and more often. How outgunned and outclassed and outmanned the Ukrainians were to the Russians. It seemed like there was always a struggle of getting more boots on the ground. We never had enough. We never had the right equipment. We were always trying to get more from command or get it from another unit, or it seemed like we were always lacking. There was another time that I witnessed how outclassed the Ukrainians' vehicles are. And I keep saying that term, outclassed, but it's the best way I can put it, because that's what it was. There was another time that I remember, it was just before I ended up leaving the front, but the Ukrainians had these older helicopters that did have missile systems on them, but they weren't smart missiles and they didn't have huge range. So what these helicopters would do is they would fly and they would bank up, so their nose was up in the air, and they would launch these missiles into the air and basically try to lob the missile up and over the front line towards any artillery or infrastructure on the Russian side. But because They're using old helicopters with old missiles that don't have the range or technology to accurately hit their targets. They're just doing these weird helicopter bank maneuvers to lob missiles over the front. Like, this is 2023, 2022, 2023 when I was out there. Like, you would think they wouldn't be using these World War II helicopters and lobbing missiles over the front. For this reason, I think the fact that Ukraine's Western allies, including America, is sending actual fighter jets and training Ukrainians to fly these fighter jets, I think it will change the entire conflict. Having real air support like that could make the difference for Ukraine. It could tip the balance of the scale in Ukraine's favor. I think the main concern is when the balance goes in Ukraine's favor is when Putin starts hitting those tactical nuke buttons. You know, of course, we pray to God that's not the case, but I think that's definitely the concern because, he's ego-driven, he's greed-driven, he's pride-driven. When he starts getting embarrassed by a smaller country, and he's already been embarrassed for the last 2 years, but when he starts losing to a smaller country, I could see his ego saying, nope, I'm taking everybody. Boop. Maybe I'm tripping. I don't know. Tell me what you think in the comments. I think we'll leave it at that for this video. This is one I wanted to make and share with you guys. I like talking about this stuff, obviously. We've been getting a ton of love. Again, thank you guys so much. I appreciate you. More content coming up tomorrow or the next day. Peace.